as soon as I say that we won't disconnect, we will disconnect when I start saying the date and all that stuff. There it was. Every day this month, I'm walking 3/4 of a mile in memory of my son, Sam. Sam passed away at 7 years old this January. I guess yesterday was the 8-month anniversary of that. Sam fought neuroblastoma for 4 years before he passed away. The last 6 months, our treatments were up in New York City, and we were going from the Ronald McDonald House over to Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center every day, and the distance from there and back is 3/4 of a mile, so that's what I'm doing. And we're doing this to raise awareness for pediatric cancer, and also we're raising some funds for Alex's Lemonade Stand, which is an organization that helps support research, and also they help support families who are on the front lines. So I always kind of think of that as like playing the long game with cancer, right? Looking for the cure, but that's not going to come overnight. So the short game is supporting the kids and their families who are in the fight still, right? I'm going to preface up front that I think tonight might be a little tough. I finally worked up the courage today to talk about the last couple of weeks of Sam's life, the last month or so. We kind of talked about the whole story, but we didn't talk about what happened in the end. And I think that's something worth hearing. So in December of last year, things were looking really good for us. I mean, obviously we were going through treatments still. They had found new spots in October, but like we had a plan and we were attacking it. And I talked to my wife, and we had planned, I had a conference outside of Boston for a week. And so I went, and while I was gone, Sam started having really bad headaches. He went into the hospital with Maud. They did an MRI, things looked okay. They checked spinal fluid, things looked okay. I take that back. His spinal fluid I don't think looked right, but it tested negative for anything. So they put him on steroids to try to stop the inflammation. I think there was a theory about inflammation caused by the surgery. I honestly can't remember, but they put him on a hefty steroid dose in December. And so that's how the month of December was for us. He was home. He was feeling pretty good. We had family come in for Christmas. We had a great Christmas. But towards the end of that, he was pretty low energy. Like we would all be outside playing yard games or something, or New Year's Eve we were outside playing, and he was just kind of curled up in somebody's lap or a chair and just cuddling. And on January 2nd, at about 5 a.m, we hear a scream from Sam's room. And so I went in there, and he's holding his head and he's screaming that it hurts. And so we call the doctors and head immediately up to Medical City. And we had MRIs that still looked okay. We had another spinal tap to see what was going on. And this time, he tested positive for bacterial meningitis, which there's a couple of people that I know who have been through that in their life and explained it to me as the most painful and excruciating experience that they've ever had. And from Sam's reaction, I would say that's about right. He was really, really hurting. I mean, imagine being in like the worst pain possible for 2 weeks. Think how long that 2 weeks would last, because that was about how long it took to get. We never really got it settled, I don't think, but we got him back to where he was. I mean, for 2 weeks, let's put it this way, for 2 weeks he was either screaming in pain or completely so snowed under on narcotic pain medications that he was unconscious. We spent that whole 2 weeks in the pediatric ICU. I made some Facebook posts about, hey, you know, the MRIs look good, it's just bacterial meningitis, we'll beat this and we'll be done. And so, you know, we proceeded to go through all of the normal stuff that we do to try to help him push through stuff. You know, we got him up out of the bed and sitting in a chair. We even got him down on the floor playing Legos. He had a surgery to place a shunt to help circulate the fluid and drain the excess fluid off of his brain. And it was another brain surgery. He had another brain surgery. And we had, he was hooked up to like all kinds of like pumps, and there was one that was hooked up to, his head had to be at the same level as this like collector of fluids, because it was like a gravity thing to drain the fluid and make sure he had the right amount of fluid in his brain and are surrounding his brain to protect it, not too much and not too little. And we had a schedule. The plan was, hey, we're gonna see if we can get him off of that, if the shunt is working the way that it should. And for some reason we kept seeing more drainage than we should. So we had a schedule with the surgeon to look at the MRIs of the shunt placement and see how things were looking. And he sat me down and showed me the pictures of where the shunt was and everything. And he proceeded to explain to me that while the shunt was functioning, Sam's brain had been through so much in various kinds of treatment that it had lost some of the elasticity that brain tissue should have. So imagine a balloon, right? When you pull on a balloon, it snaps back into place. And then imagine that you have a balloon that you pull out of place and it just doesn't. And that was part of the issue that we were having. And then he hit me with the other issue. That in the 2 weeks or so between those MRIs, Sam's cancer was making an aggressive return in his brain. And the scar tissue from the bacterial meningitis was blocking the flow of fluids through his brain and spinal system, which meant that we couldn't hit it with the treatment that he had been receiving, the intracranial intrathecal antibody. The parts of it that would have responded to radiation already had, so these were considered to be radiation resistant spots. Chemotherapy drugs don't pass through, the ones that we could have used don't pass through that blood-brain barrier, so we couldn't get chemo to it. And so basically he said, he was trying to explain to me that every option we had to fight was gone, that there was nothing left that we could do. And so I asked him, you know, what are we looking at here? Like months? And he said weeks, maybe. His guess was 2 weeks. He ended up being spot on almost to the day. And so After that came a big meeting in a conference room with my wife and I, representatives from the surgical team, the nursing staff, the anesthesia team, I think, the oncology team, hospice care, one other person, and a facilitator who was there to, I don't know, make it easier to talk about. I must have driven my wife crazy in that meeting. For those of you who have never sat down with me when I'm under stress, or feeling pressure or sad, I start making a lot of jokes. A lot of jokes. And, you know, I was taking it seriously, but, you know, I will admit to having solicited a couple of shocked looks in that meeting with off-color statements and questions. I think, you know, for the most part, we understood what was going on, and I think for the most part, we and the teams all, you know, I know we all had Sam's best interests at heart. I think there was a little bit of disagreement for a minute about what that best interest was between some of us. It doesn't matter. It didn't matter. You know. So the decision was made that because of the amount of pain Sam was in, still, that he would ride it out in the hospital on the 6th floor with doctors and nurses who have over the years become like family to us. And so we made it out of the PICU a couple days later after he was able to get off of the drain, because none of that really mattered anymore. And they put us up in the biggest hospital room that I've ever been in, with a beautiful west-facing view. Some of y'all might have seen, I think we posted it last night or 2 nights ago, the picture of, sorry, the mosquitoes are thick, the picture of Maud and Sam and I watching the sunset. They moved a second hospital bed in next to his, pushed them together and dropped the center rails so that Maud and we all would sleep, the 3 of us together. All the parents came in town to spend some time with him, because he was, at this point, he had recovered enough from the meningitis that he was lucid and talking to you. And I think I had mentioned before, though, that he was never able to actually open his eyes after the surgery with the shunt placement and stuff. I mean, his poor little brain had been through so much. Who knows what was going on with that? And so if he wanted to look at you, most of the time it didn't bother him, but it's funny, in the last couple days he decided that he wanted to watch some iPad, or if he was talking to you and he wasn't 100% sure that you were paying attention, he would go and open one. And I mean, the poor kid was still on so many narcotics that they were like rolling around. He couldn't even focus on stuff. But we would sit and he would, you know, come in and out of consciousness. He would tell jokes. Maud and I, it's like 10:30 at night, and Maud and I are sitting there, and I thought he was asleep. And we're all there, and she and I are quietly talking, and he pops up and goes, "What did the taco say to the nacho?" I'm sorry, I'm not doing it right. He said, "What did the taco say to the nacho?" I said, "Well, I don't know what." He goes, "That's nacho cheese." And then he laid back down and went back to sleep. He had you could tell he was having interesting dreams. And I honestly believe, looking back, he was saying goodbye to people when he was dreaming. Because he went through people in order. He had a dream about Emmy and Ben. He had a dream about Alec and Abram and Henry that they were playing together. He dreamed about his mama and I. And he would just kind of talk through those. And he was, he'd order 3 egg tacos at a time still and try to get them down. He could barely keep anything in his mouth. I think I told y'all about the feeding tube and what a nightmare that was. When we tried to move him from the PICU to the floor, they tried to put a feeding tube in and it just didn't happen. And it was terrifying for him and hard. And at the end of it though, he said, "I'll eat, I promise I'll eat, just don't do it anymore." And he did. From then on out, he ate. And he ate some crazy stuff. He started inventing things. The one you've heard about that I will never forget in my life is crunchy pudding. He had been eating a lot of chocolate pudding, and then one day he said, "Put the Honey Nut Cheerios in the pudding." And thus crunchy pudding was born, and he must have gone through a dozen tubs of crunchy pudding in his last few days. Emmy and Ben would come up and visit. I've already talked about having to tell Emmy what was going on. I don't think I can talk about that again. That was too hard. That might have been the hardest part of all of it. The rest of it, we didn't have any choices or there was nothing to do other than just be there and love him and support him. Walking to Emmy and sitting down with her was tough. It was interesting how things kind of shifted. It wasn't easy to let go of the fight, to be in fight mode. Because it was, we were like in it, heavy in it. Like we are in the middle of this fight, and then all of a sudden the rug was just pulled right out from under us. And so it was hard to switch gears. But when we got there, it was just about being present and soaking up Sam, because Sam was a personality all his own. And so just being there with him and getting as much of that as we could before it was gone was such a blessing to be able to do that. And it felt different, and he never asked me or anyone else, to my knowledge, whether he was dying. We didn't bring that up. We figured if he wanted to talk about it, we would be open with him about it. But if he wasn't, why scare him? But I've talked to a few people who are around for that, and I think he knew from just the way he was and the things he told us. I think he knew. He was always looking out for us, all the time, and I think that's why he didn't say anything. My favorite story, I think, out of the whole thing was on the last day, the bishop came to pray with us, and he went to anoint Sam's forehead with chrism oil. And we all thought Sam was asleep. And as soon as that chrism oil hits his head, with eyes closed and laying there, he says, "Not yet." And what did he know? What did he know? And it wasn't it wasn't half an hour later that we watched the oxygen saturation on the meters drop to 0. Hey guys,
Hey man,
how y'all doing?
you?
Good. Y'all doing all right?
Doing good.
Good. I'll tell. Have I told you about this?
No, Merritt told me a little
Okay.
bit about it.
I'll talk to you about it
Yeah,
later.
we're
I'm
gonna
gonna finish
talk
up. The oxygen went to 0. And then he went through this phase where, you know, Sam was gone. His body was still fighting reflexively, but Sam was gone. And so Maud and I held him, and some of the nurses held us, and we sat there with him while he made his transition over, and then he was gone. And you know, that was him. Always going to be a pivot point in our life. That, you know, there's life before Sam and his cancer fight. There's life with Sam and his cancer fight, and then there's life after that. And I said yesterday, I know life is going to be good, but it'll never be as good as it could have been. Sorry for the downers tonight, guys. But the whole point of this is awareness, right? It's not all smiling bald kids who are winning fights. And you know, I've talked before about trying to be open. There's still a ton of stuff that there's no way we can ever tell y'all. There's just no way. And even if we did, the words would never do it justice. So please take a minute, hug or call somebody that you love, share the story, share these videos. I'm not here to try to cure cancer. I'm just a guy with a selfie stick in an alley. But I would sure love it if we can find a way to make things just one step easier for the kids and one step easier for the families. And that's the point. So we love you guys. See you tomorrow.